You're listening to Conflict Radio on the Conflict Radio Network. Greetings and welcome to Conflict Radio. Today we're going to be speaking with Gary Michael Vasey. And Gary has over 40 books in print. He's an established author with notable contributions in the area of the paranormal, including several number one bestsellers in the supernatural category, metaphysics and magic, poetry, and business. He is also a collector of your own strange stories at his Haunted Life 2 TOO website. He is also the presenter of the Magical World of G. Michael Vasey podcast series. In 2016, he resumed his interest in music and has released 2 albums of self-penned and self-performed songs, and since then, he has been churning out catchy songs at a rapid rate. He was born in the city of Hull in England and grew up in East Yorkshire. His Haunted Life trilogy of books has been highly successful, reaching number 1 on both sides of the Atlantic. His most recent books have included a tour of the supernatural side of the Czech Republic, a set of scariest stories submitted to his website, a new book of magical experiences, and a beautiful volume of poetry. Now, Michael's going to be joining us for a little while. His best-selling book's pretty interesting. The Chilling True Terror of the Black-Eyed Kids, a monster compilation, 2nd edition, and Black-Eyed Kids, Can We Come In? Terrifying Encounters. We're going to talk to him because I got an email from a listener, and he had a really interesting story to tell about Black-Eyed Kids, and asked if I could get somebody on to discuss the subject. And what I did was I went ahead and got somebody who wrote a couple best-selling books on the subject, and I actually got a hold of the listener and had him join us on the show as well. So if you have a story that you'd like to tell, or if you have a guest that you would like to speak with, send me an email. Just go to my website, www.conflictradio.net, and hit the contact tab, and you'll learn all about how to get in touch with me. So we're just going to go ahead and get right into it. We'll be right back right after this. Welcome back to Conflict Radio. We're with Gary Vasey. He's going to talk to us about Black-Eyed Kids. Gary, how are you today?
Good, a little warm.
Now, your book, The Black-Eyed Kids, I did some homework on this. I was trying to find somebody who knew about Black-Eyed Kids. I've got a listener who sent me a really awesome story in my email, so I decided to find a guest and then get that listener on. So we're going to be bringing him on in a little bit. But can you tell me about Black-Eyed Kids? What are they? What's going on?
Yeah, well, exactly what they are, we can get into, but the general sort of storyline that has become popular as a bit of an urban myth, I guess, is that at some time late in the evening, there's a knock on the door, and where the person in the house, hearing the knock, starts to feel a strange sense of unease, usually, almost like a precognition that something not very good is going to happen, I would suggest. Well, if they don't answer the door, then the knocking continues persistently until they go to the door. Maybe they'll look through the peephole or something, and they'll see a couple of kids. The kids will usually be teenagers. There might be 1, 2, 3 of them. They are usually dressed in a sort of Victorian style, kind of differently, not quite right. It doesn't fit, the dress doesn't fit with sort of today's style. And the person answering the door gets more and more nervous, usually. The kids start to say, let us in, let us in. They may use different excuses to get in. It might be use the telephone. Usually it is use the telephone, but it could be other reasons. Sometimes the story takes place in a car, so they want a lift somewhere. It's the same kind of story. And at some point in this sort of encounter, the person will open the door, will see these 2 kids, because, 2 kids on the doorstep, 14, 12 years old, at midnight, you start worrying, why are they there? Have they got lost? Parents, where are the parents? Do I need to help them? But then you open the door and you've got this horrible sense of something's not right, increasing fear crawling up the back of your neck, and then you notice their eyes, and their eyes are completely black. And this is when usually people bolt, close the door, won't let the kids in. And sometimes this will be associated with electronic malfunctions, so the lights will flicker, electrical things won't work, the TV will go on and off. Usually the kids will hang around for a while, persistently knocking. Sometimes they'll start to get threatening, let us in or else. And that's basically the story. And it's a very compelling story. And as we will probably discover later on, I run a website, and it's called myhauntedlife2.com. And the idea there is the typical one. You send in your stories of encounters with the paranormal. And when I don't have a story from you, I have a couple of stories of my own that I've posted. And so over the years, I've collected thousands and thousands of stories. And since I've seen ghosts pretty much since I was a kid, and been involved in magic and all this sort of stuff, nothing really bothers me particularly. But one day, I got about 4 or 5 years ago, I read this story that someone submitted, and it was exactly that story. It was black-eyed kids on the doorstep. And for the first time in a long time, I had that sense of, oh my God, this is really, really pretty scary stuff. And I'd hate to be alone in a place at midnight and have this happen to me. So I posted this story thinking it was like a one-off, because I'd never heard of black-eyed kids, I'll be honest with you. And the next thing I know is this thing's all over the internet, and I've got tens and tens of stories pouring in all different types of contexts. How can black-eyed kids be on a USAF base with high-level security, but there they are, somebody's having an encounter on a USAF base, an RAF base. There's lots of stories at Walmart for some reason. And then I started to think, well, this is sort of a North American story. But it isn't, because when I started to delve into this, and I like to do research around these stories. So I gather stories, I see a trend, and then I like to do some research and try to get to the bottom of what's going on. And this is what I started to do with the black-eyed kids or black-eyed people stories. And the more I dug, the more I found that, in fact, these kind of stories are everywhere. Australia, UK, France. And although some people will tell you that this was a sort of story that was made up by a guy called Bethel in Texas not so long ago and sort of went viral because of internet, the truth is that I have stories going back 100 years plus. And if you then sort of broaden the search to just this generic black-eyed, white-skinned kid that hangs around in forests or bothers people, then it goes back into prehistory. So it seems like whoever these black-eyed kids or black-eyed people are, they've been bothering humanity for quite some time.
So have you heard any stories of people actually letting them in?
I've only had 2 stories of people letting them in. And in both instances, it was a pretty unpleasant encounter. In one, they basically were allowed in by, I think it was the lady allowed them in because her husband went to the kitchen to get the telephone. And they both fell ill. Their pets all died. They both got some kind of disease. I think one had cancer. They both survived, but they escaped by the skin of their teeth. And in the other example, they really suffered in terms of the kids telling them that they were going to die, and they developed cancer and other illnesses, but again survived. And if these black-eyed kids are so prevalent, particularly it seems in sort of your neck of the woods in southern US, a lot of stories in Texas, Alabama, that kind of Mississippi Valley region,
okay,
then you have to ask yourself, well, surely some people must let them in, so what happens? And in the book, I do make a bit of a comparison between the fact that there was one set of incidents with black-eyed kids in a neighborhood and the family completely disappeared around the same time that these black-eyed kids were in the neighborhood. Now, of course, I can't make the connection really, but in terms of like author privilege, you start to ask the question, well, could there have been the victims of black-eyed kids? And if black-eyed kids are so prevalent, and if some people let them in and there are no stories, could some of the, thousands upon thousands of people that go missing every year be down to black-eyed kids? Your guess is as good as mine, but I don't see why not,
Yeah. Now, so what do they want? Do they, like, the people that have let them in? Have you heard any stories about them saying like they want something, or they have to give them something, or?
Well, they want two things. They want to be let in. That's very important, and they want to use the telephone, the telefax, I think, in one instance, or they want a ride to some place. And if you're going to be possessed, then basically the demon needs to have your permission to possess you. And so when a black-eyed kid asks to be let in, and you say yes, you're granting them permission to cross the threshold, which means take control of you. So if they are sort of a demonic type entity, then you're actually, by agreeing to let them in, you're allowing them to take possession of you. So what do they want? They want to possess people.
Now, do you think that the kids that are there are possessed kids?
It's very difficult to say what they are. I put a lot of effort into trying to figure that out. And of course, some people have made a link to UFOs and aliens because of the black eyes, etc., and the men in black. Some people talk more about demons and the demonic. I think that I'm interested in the paranormal. I'm also interested in the occult and magic. I'm a practicing magician. And I have come to the conclusion that we create our own reality, and that there are two ways entities like this can exist. They can either exist as independent entities out there that we normally wouldn't see, wouldn't interact with because they're in a slightly different vibration, but under certain circumstances, we can see them. And these entities feed off our fear or sexual needs. That's the energy that they suck on. It's like a vampire, but it's not the blood they're after. It's your fear energy or your sexual energy or whatever. And black-eyed kids and the old hag, the thing that sits on you in sleep paralysis and takes advantage of you, that would be another example of that type of entity. The second type of entity is one that you actually grow and give life to yourself by potentially constantly thinking about something negative. And you create a thought form which then begins to attach itself to your aura, and you energize it every time you think negative thoughts like anger or lust, for example, until the point it literally can take on a life of its own, and it starts to control your behavior in order to get the energy that it needs to survive. And this sort of parasitic entity, I think you had Anthony Peake on, and Anthony and I have some similar theories about parasitic entities and egregores, thought forms created by human thought. In the case of the black-eyed kids, I don't think it's a thought form. I do think it's an independent parasitic entity of some type that feeds off of our fear or sexual energy.
All right, yeah, we did have Anthony Peake on. He's a fascinating character. Did you mention black-eyed kids to him?
Yeah, he's read my Black-Eyed Kids book. He's read most of my books. We talk on and off. I had the pleasure of being asked to review his first book about life after death, and was completely fascinated by his approach, and have been in touch pretty much ever since. I had him as a guest on my podcast just recently as well. So I spoke to him just recently about his last book. And we got into talking about parasitic entities, and then we sort of drifted into talking about synchronicity, because as you know, Anthony Peake, I don't want to go too far off topic, but this is good.
Yeah.
Anthony Peake is into this idea of synchronicity, as am I as a magician, because when my life has coincidences that are synchronous, then I feel I'm on the right track, yes, in terms of where my life is going. It's me telling me I'm on the right path, so to speak. And we started to talk about the paranormal show Hellier. I don't know if you've come across the show Hellier.
No, I haven't actually.
But it's a big time paranormal show that's into 2 seasons. It's independently done. You can see it on YouTube or the Hellier website. That's Hellier. And it was really, it was ridiculous. We start talking about Hellier, and it was synchronicity after synchronicity after synchronicity, to the point like you just felt that the whole conversation had gone crazy. But to go back to the original topic, I think that Anthony and I have similar ideas about what these entities are, and I would class the black-eyed kids, black-eyed people, in with things like shadow people, the old hag, which is the sleep paralysis thing, succubi, incubi, demons. I think these are all sort of intradimensional beings that feed off human energy, and in order to get us to be frightened, they frighten us. This is that simple.
Yeah, shadow people is something that, I've actually seen one once, and I wasn't very scared of it. It just kind of walked off, into the corner of the house or whatever, and I didn't really think much of it except for, well, that was a shadow person.
There's shadow people and there's shadow peoples. So there's the Hat Man and there's various characters that are a bit more obnoxious and a bit more well known, and they tend to also be part of this sleep paralysis experience sometimes with certain people. Sort of like the generic sort of shadow, I think could be something else. That could be even seeing a sort of parallel universe, having a glimpse of a parallel universe. I have an author that I talked to called Tom Bowley, and he lives in Philippines, and he wrote a book about ghosts in Japan, and which I published through my little publishing company. And he tells a beautiful story, in fact, of how he encountered a shadow man on his staircase, and they both stood looking at each other, and the shadow man turned and ran. So the thinking was maybe he was the ghost in the shadow man's universe.
Yeah. Now, in today's time, since we've all been locked down and everything, have you noticed an increase in sightings, or has it been a decrease, or is it about the same? You think?
No, it's been much slower in terms of stories coming into me about black-eyed people, black-eyed kids, than it was for a couple of years around the time before I put the book out. We do get the odd story. We had a story a couple of 3 weeks ago about black-eyed kids, and it was a very typical encounter. I don't think that black-eyed kid encounters are as common as you might think reading the internet, but I do think that they've been going on for centuries, and therefore, because we live in the era where people have blogs and social media and easy ways to communicate, the stories have become more prevalent. I do think also that from time to time, people make up stories just because, they want to feel important. They want something nice to say on Reddit. So you have to be a bit cautious. But like I say, I've discovered stories about French black-eyed people and black-eyed kids in the 18th century. The certain indigenous American Indians, their bogeyman were black-eyed kids that lived in the forest and, would steal your soul, that kind of thing. So these black-eyed peoples have been around, I think, as long as we have. And there is obviously some kind of symbiotic relationship, which is in their favor, not ours. The other thing is that this idea of black eyes has sort of taken on psychological meaning, because if you think about Hollywood horror movies, they often use the black eyes to indicate demonic or possession or something nasty and evil. And even in normal psychology, they will talk about angry people developing black eyes. And in the book, I did it as an investigative account as opposed to just a bunch of stories. although I utilize stories throughout to sort of illustrate the point, I actually got into talking about some of these other meanings of black eyes. And I think I quoted from a book called The Eyes of a Sociopath by Donna Anderson, in which her husband, who normally had bright light blue eyes, when he lost his temper, his eyes would change color to black and he would become an evil person. And it's almost as if they're taken over by a demonic moment or a demonic entity. It's almost as if with them, the entity has actually attached itself and is driving their behavior.
Do you think it's possible for the entity and the person to be occupying the body obviously at the same time, but the entity actually...
The black eye, the demonic entity wouldn't be occupying the body, but would be attached to the energy body of the person more or less permanently. And then that entity can, in fact, drive your behavior if you're operating semi-consciously. And let's face it, most of us operate throughout life more or less totally unconsciously all the time. We don't actually think about what we're doing. We're not living in the moment. We don't really know what we're driven by. And if someone is an alcoholic who's prone to strong temper and fits of rage, could very well be, providing food energy to a demonic entity that's attached itself to them and is basically driving that behavior. And this is the sort of overlap with magic, because in magic, what we do as magicians, occultists, is we look at ourselves and we try to examine ourselves and change ourselves, because it is our behavior that causes cause in our life, and it is the effect of that behavior that we feel. So if we cannot get on with people and are constantly being put down, the idea is examine what it is about yourself that needs to change and take responsibility for it, change the cause, you get a different effect. So magic is making changes in effect by changing the cause, yes? And so I think all of these things are interrelated. Those people that think, for example, that black-eyed kids are aliens, well, if they are intradimensional beings, and if you subscribe to certain aspects of ufology, people like Alan Greenfield, for example, he thinks that these UFOs are ultra-terrestrials, i.e. interdimensional beings, and they are in fact one and the same as the very demons that people like Aleister Crowley used to summon up. So you start to get this amazing, it sounds bizarre if you haven't looked into this thing and sort of started to convince yourself. I know it does, but it's possible that UFOs and aliens and demons are one and the same thing. They're intradimensional beings that have a symbiotic relationship.
I'm getting you a little muffled coming in now.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Maybe it's the internet. They're just ultra dimensional beings that have a symbiotic relationship with humanity, and that they have had since time immemorial, potentially. But I tell you, the black-eyed kids are the one thing that if I'm going to be frightened, it's at 2:00 hearing a knock on the door, and I have since I got into black-eyed kids. They say once you've heard about them, they may visit. And there's been once or twice when I've woken up at 2-3 o'clock in the morning because of some knocking at the door, whether I was dreaming it, imagining it, whether it was real. Gosh, it certainly got my attention.
Yeah, I would imagine it would. Let's take a break, and then when we come back, let's get on one of our listeners who wants to talk to you. He asked me to get on an expert on black-eyed kids. So let's take a quick break, and we'll come back, and we'll get him on.
Sounds good.
All right, we'll be right back with Conflict Radio right after this. Welcome back to Conflict Radio. We're with Gary Vasey. He's an expert on black-eyed kids, and we have a listener that sent me an email about black-eyed kids and asked me to get on a guest, so we did, and then I decided to go ahead and get him on the show. His name is Byron. He's from Finland. Byron, you there?
I'm here. I'm right here.
Well, yeah. Gary's with us. Gary's still there. Gary?
Yeah.
All right, so Byron, why don't you tell Gary the story that you sent me in an email I'll let you guys have at it for a little while.
Okay.
Sure. Do you want the abridged version or do you want the actual account? Because it's quite comprehensive.
No,
It
give us
really
the
is.
full account because I'll be listening for certain details. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Okay. All right. Let's start from the fresh then. Okay. Let's go back. It's 1986.
Yeah.
I'm off to a Smiths concert revival in GMX area, Manchester. I can't get there on time, so I'm getting there late afternoon, and I have a spare ticket because I couldn't get there with my friend, and I'm alone. I pull up to the area very close there to try and park, and luckily I find a parking space. As I'm getting out of the car, there's a bunch of little kids, 12, 13, 14 years of age, and they're harassing me about looking after my car.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bit like, hey, we'll look after your car, mate. Just give us some money and we'll make sure your car's safe. And I'm like, yeah, here we go. And I was like, all right, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a $5, but I'll cut it in half. And that way, if the car's in good condition when I come back, I'll give you the other half of the £5 note.
Yeah.
At this point, I could see one of the kids was like pushing the other one a little and gesticulating sort of behind me. And I sort of looked behind and saw 3 other kids, like in a good distance away. And at that point, one of the kids said, no, it's okay. Just forget it, And these guys like hot-footed it off, And I'm thinking, okay, here we go. I got 2 gangs of little kids about to do damages to cars, and I wasn't know what to think. So I think, you know what, I'll move the car. I get into the car, put the key in the ignition, and within milliseconds, these other kids were right by the side door.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, out of nowhere. I mean, like super flash fast.
Yeah.
And I got the key in the ignition halfway, and I'm like looking at this kid who's banging on the window.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I noticed is that his clothes were all really unkempt. I could only see like his like chest downwards for this time, and he's like massive t-shirt on, and like these sort of pants with a belt tied around him like a potato sack, And then I sort of looked up at him a little bit, and I could see his eyes were just like really, really black. I mean, like jet black, not like matte black or glossy black, but just black.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's 2 kids next to him. They were a bit smaller. And I'd say the stature was like, I don't know, 13, 14 maybe, sort of about that sort of size, Hair was like unkempt, brown or black with this main kid. And he just said, I need to get in your car.
Uh-huh.
Let me in your car.
So did he
let me
say just like, I need to get in your car? Or did he ask to get in your car?
I was looking at this kid. The thing that got me most was the feeling that I got between my rib cage next to my stomach. It just turned barrel ways. I mean, I just cannot describe the feeling that I got. It was just absolutely gut-wrenchingly painful. And I was looking at this kid, and before I knew it, there was like the other 2 were at the back doors of my car, like sort of next to the car as if they were trying to get in. And he said, we need to get in your car. I have to get in the car. We need to get in your car. Let me in your car. And I sort of like had this horrible dread feeling. But
Yeah.
I also somehow found myself reaching for the door,
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, the keys fell out of the ignition and landed on the floor of the car. And I snapped to it real quick at that point. And I was just like, forget this. I'm I'm out of here, Cranked the car, bang, I was just like out of there. And these two guys moved. So I got to the end of the road, threw a right or left or whichever direction I went, and plowed down the road. I mean, he just gave me the absolute creeps, and I mean the creeps. And I see these former kids that were there before trying to hustle me for the protection of the car. And they were waving at me, and I stopped the car, and they said, "Give us a ride. Please, just give us a ride, So I took these guys into the middle of Manchester, and we sat and we had like, I don't know, was it like some sort of cafe restaurant thing that's open? Yeah, fish and chip place, some English thing. And I was just saying, what the hell was this? We're talking a little bit in the car because they seemed quite scared as well,
Mm-hmm.
They said that they'd been out there in the street earlier and seen these three individuals. I'll call them individuals because they were odd things. And they said that they'd seen the same situation going on with a woman in another car. But what freaked out two of those boys was the speed of which the other two that was with the main one sort of went around the car. They said that they moved like something that it was just like a quick flash, as if a shadow had just like flown around the car. And at that point, they hot-legged it away from the area. So that was a couple of streets away from this point, And we talked a little bit. They seemed to just be happy to be away from the area. I never went to the concert. I went home, myself. I felt very disturbed. I mean, it's even thinking about it now makes my stomach turn. It really does. But anyway, I see a friend of mine from work, and I talk about it a little bit. And he's Ziggy Stardust fan, this David Bowie.
Yeah.
He has himself a contact lens. And he has two different colored eyes. And I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe that's it, Maybe that's what it is. Perhaps that. So I kind of fooled myself into thinking that for a long time, many, many years. And I sort of somehow kind of made peace with it, but it never rested well. I really felt really bad in my stomach with this. And I had this overwhelming sense of dread. Anyway, life goes on. I've been living in Australia, Hong Kong, Central Europe myself, different parts of the world. Married a Finnish lady and ended up in Finland. And then 2018, November, December time, well, actually it was November, I think, there's a knock at the door in my house. I just peeked through the window and I'm thinking, what's this? Are they selling something for scouts or whatever? Just usual stuff. And I opened up the door, just a crack, and it's the same kids. The exact same look, different kind of clothing. Hair was sort of different. Eyes were just blacker than black. And immediately I just got that sense of like horribleness in my stomach again. It just absolutely shook the shit out of me. And he's speaking to me in Finnish.
Bloody hell.
Which I understand. And I'm just like, what the hell, And they're speaking to me in aggressive Finnish and polite Finnish. And it's the same gist. I want to get in your house. Please let us in the house. Well, there was no police or anything. It's let us in the house. I need to get in that house. We need to get in the house. Let us in. It's cold. We're very cold. Let us in this house. And I wasn't buying it for a second. I mean, I had the sense of dread, but I was just like, bang. I slammed that door shut, ran to the back of my house where I get my crossbow, loaded the crossbow, and then just went straight back to the kitchen and was looking out over the driveway. And these guys like hung around in the. I'm sorry, I'm missing out a piece here because I'm a bit shaken thinking about it. Still, it's too close. Before I slammed the door to these guys, one of the guys motioned backwards, pointed at my van, and was like, "It's a better car than you had in Manchester." And at that point, I slammed the door, ran for the crossbow, and then came back to the kitchen. But they hung around in the driveway and the area in front of my house for about 3-4 minutes, And I just sat there. Well, I stood there, perched with my crossbow, just in case anything happened. It just absolutely scared the living daylights out of me.
Mm-hmm.
I reacted a whole lot quicker this time, but just horrible feeling, Horrible.
Can I imagine?
And the first time around, I kind of thought about it for years afterwards and mentioned it to some people and talked about it. And, one guy, most people just thought it was, it's like, yeah, scared of kids and, you muppet, they didn't really have anything to say. One guy said, sounds like you met an alien. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. And then this other guy was like, it sounds like a vampire. And I'm like, what do you mean a vampire? I didn't see any teeth. And he's just like, no. The vampire needs a permission to come in the house or something. And I was just thinking about it that way. It's just like, in Manchester, the back door of the car was actually open, It's like they could have gone into my car quite easily. I mean, very easily. And why they didn't, I don't know. And why it is that I had this sort of overwhelming feeling of like sheer helplessness and dread. It's just, it's shaken me. I promise you, it's absolutely shaken me to the core. These two accounts, I'm telling you, it's even now I'm feeling quite disturbed.
Yeah, you can sense it in your voice.
Sorry?
You can sense it in your voice.
Oh, I'm sorry if I'm coming across as shaky, but it really was kind of harrowing. And, there's nothing great about this story. And I'm not, writing books or websites or whatever. I'm actually a big guy. I'm 140 kilos. I'm built like an American linebacker. I will hunt. I'll go out and face things. I'm a big guy. There's nothing scares me. The only thing that really scares me in my life is outliving my kids.
So, Gary, do you think that they attached themselves to Byron for all those years?
No, I think that they see him as a potential victim, and I think you're quite right that you didn't give them permission. You didn't give them permission to enter, but you're on their radar, obviously. And I don't think they're aliens. I think they're ultra-dimensional beings that feed on fear, and you must try not to be frightened. One strategy that does work is get angry instead of fearful. That does help you. That getting angry gives them not the emotional content they're looking for. It doesn't necessarily help you long term, but in the short term, it can help because the anger means that you don't give them fear. Certainly, don't ever let them in. Don't give them permission. And the way they move is also very consistent with a lot of stories that I've had come to me. It's that intradimensional capability of being able to almost like a horror movie. When you see, a demon move in a horror movie, it kind of jumps through space very quickly.
Well, when they moved around the back of the car, I can't really say. They moved super quick, super quick. And like I said, they could have got in, but they weren't in any rush leaving my driveway here in Finland. I mean,
No, because
they
they
just
got
sort
you
of
scared. Yeah,
meandered out. Yeah.
they had some fear from you. That's at least the start, and
Well,
they were able to use the fact that you'd seen them before to get you to be frightened, and that was a little bit of fear energy is good. But what they really want is for you to let them in. You're essentially, if you let them in, you're giving them permission to cross your threshold. In other words, take
yep.
possession of your soul. So don't let them. Whatever you do.
Well, this is it. Yeah. I'm pretty much clued up to that. You know, I mean, I'm just a bit sort of. The facial expressions were there, but you know, there is another thing that I didn't really see, and it's sort of weird because I mentioned it before. This friend of mine years ago goes, "Oh, it sounds like a vampire," and I was thinking, well, they didn't have any teeth, and then I'm thinking to myself, I can't remember seeing any teeth at all. You know, thinking about it, which was weird, just lips moving, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, some people say that they don't even think that they speak. It's more that you hear the voice in your head, and you're not sure if they're actually speaking or not. Other people have gone even further than that and said, well, even though they were hanging around in the neighborhood after I wouldn't let them in, none of my neighbors ever saw anything unusual. So it's almost like I was the only person that actually saw these things.
Oh God, that sounds even worse.
And sometimes people report electrical disturbances, so like flickering house lights or car stalling or that kind of thing as well.
No, nothing like that. But also the thing is, it's like the kids in Manchester that I gave the ride into the town. They actually saw this stuff as well. So
what did they think they were?
Sorry.
What did they think that the other kids were?
Well, they didn't. They said they just felt really uneasy. In fact, one of them was like close to tears when he was talking about it. And we're talking about Manchester street hustlers here at that age, you know. Yeah. One of them just looked kind of like how I feel, you know. Even now.
No, everybody reports this feeling of dread. Really, frightened, really scared for no reason. I mean, people say I'm looking out through the peephole and I see a couple of young kids and I'm concerned that two kids are out at 2:00 in the morning, yet I'm absolutely scared shitless at the same time, filled with dread. And they can't quite figure out, how one reconciles with the other.
Well, yeah.
So they definitely create this fear in people.
Yeah, it really doesn't cover the sheer gut-wrenching feeling from, I don't know, your rib cage to your balls. Everything got twisted up that first time, and the second time it was on the same level. And it's just this massive feeling of helplessness that came with it as well. I tell you, I won't be feeling
they're not actually in our reality. They're in a parallel reality that's how they're able to be in Manchester and Finland, for example. I mean, there's an overlap of realities here. They're not in our reality. That's why the movement can be peculiar, I think. It's this ultra. They're not. I don't think they're aliens. I think they're what are called, these ultra types, which are indigenous to the planet. Some people think they're aliens. Some people mistake them for aliens. Some people mistake them for vampires and demons. And they kind of behave like birth in a sense, because what they're after is your
and the clothing.
Human
What's
life.
The clothing? The clothing just looked odd. It just didn't sort of match, as if the shoes were too big and the pants were out of size. And
quite often people will say they're wearing like Victorian, not right clothing, like out of time Victorian or strange clothing that doesn't seem to fit with the 2020 or whenever it's happening. So that's another consistency in the story.
Byron, what time was it when they come by your house?
Early evening, 6:30, 7 o'clock. Very dark in Finland then. It's dark a lot of the time through the winter. Obviously, it's a very dark country through the winter months and very daylight in the summer. But it was afternoon, like I say, late afternoon in Manchester, an early evening in Finland.
Did you feel like you lost any time? Because sometimes there's an element of almost hypnosis involved
Zero
as well.
time.
Like you fall under hypnotic suggestion and you're fighting with this hypnotic suggestion. And sometimes there's this sense that people lost a few minutes of time.
No, I didn't feel any time loss. I did sort of find myself aware that I was doing something that I didn't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
That was the car, because I found myself like leaving my hand to go to the door, and that's when the keys sort of dropped to the floor and pulled me back into some sort of reality. It was kind of immediate then at that point. It's as if something else took over, because I was just like, grab the keys and bosh, I was like pretty much powered out of there.
I can imagine.
Sorry?
Too. I said I can imagine I would have been gone as fast as possible too.
I don't know. I mean, I've come up across wild pigs in my day, big ones, and not had that sense of worry. I say worry's a really light word for this. I'm talking about something that just gets your insides and just rips them into a tight ball. Like even now, it just still gives me the absolute shakes. I talk to this about some people I know, and they're just looking at me like, you're scared of something like that? What the hell? Who are you? You're not the sort of person I know. And so eventually I've stopped talking about it to people. It's just, I don't know. I think you might be right in some ways that they've identified me for something, but whatever it is, they are not human. I can promise you.
No, they're not. They're ultra-dimensional beings. I mean, that's the hypothesis, and I think they fall in. As I was talking earlier, I think they fall into the same category as demons and vampires and succubi, incubi, the old hag. They're sort of an entity that is parasitic. It feeds off human fear and sex energy, if you want. And so long as you're giving them that fear, they're getting something of what they want, what they survive on. But it's more or less, they make it more or less, excuse me, more or less impossible not to experience fear, because it's almost a hypnotic suggestion that you should be frightened. And the black eyes always usually do it. When people notice those black eyes.
Yeah, they certainly succeeded, I can tell you. So much so, I mean, I was considering it anyway, but me and the wife sold the house, pretty much 6 months after that. We've moved somewhere else now, but we're still in Finland. But, that wasn't the main reason for moving house, but I was really happy to actually do it,
Byron,
did you ever get any sort of precognition that you might see them again, or was there can you think of any pattern in your emotional
I can tell you
life?
what, if I do see them again, I am not going to hesitate. I will shoot one of them, I swear to God.
But what I'm trying to get at is, can you see any parallel about your emotional state at the time that these two events took place, or not?
Well, no. I mean, I was quite pumped up and hyped to go to the concert. And it was just another regular day for me in Finland. So, no, there was nothing. I'm a positive, happy guy normally. It's only when I start thinking about that subject it starts freaking me out.
Yeah, that's the question I had, was whether or not you were sad or depressed at the time.
No. I'm a happy guy generally. 90% of the time I'm smiling. Got 4 children, 30 years of a relationship. Very stable here. I don't have any depressions or ups and downs that way. So,
Gary, do you have any advice for Byron?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, my first advice is don't let them in. Try not to be afraid of them. Try to be angry, as I already said. Try to use anger You know, if you are frightened, getting angry, anger sort of supersedes fear. So I learned this from my father when I was a kid, with poltergeist activity in the house that was scaring me stupid as well. And I realized that if I got angry, I seemed to shut the faucet of energy that was allowing the poltergeist to manifest. And I think that there will be some similarity with these things. Those are about the only pieces of advice I could give. Now, if they bother you again, I would possibly look for outside help, and I would probably go to an occultist who knew about such things and was able to perhaps engage in some exorcism or something along those lines, or some protection.
So are we talking ultra-dimensional beings here, then, or more so than, how do you say, demons or vampires?
I think they're one and the same thing. I mean, as humanity's passed through time and cultures, these things have been called different things at different times. But I happen to believe, and I know quite a few others that do from all different backgrounds, that these things have been around as long as we have. So you tend to call them whatever is in vogue at the time. This alien designation is because, you know, since 1950s, there's been a lot of interest in ufology and alien encounters. And so this is just a new way of looking at them. But you can go back 1,000 years, and the North American Indians were experiencing these black-eyed kids in the forest, attempting to steal their souls. So they've been around a long, long time. And I think they kind of overlap with us dimensionally. They see us as providing some food, some energy, and they know how to work us.
100% that these things are like completely sentient. You know, I mean, the way the guy like gesticulated with his thumb and hand in a waving motion towards my van and just said, you know, better car than you had in Manchester in English, you know. It just, I don't, you know, it sounds like there's some sort of, I don't know, mocking, jocular kind of behavior in there as well, you know.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the idea that these interdimensional beings are also, I mean, there's a guy called Alan Greenfield, and he written a couple of books, and I'm going to be talking to him in a month's time. He thinks that, you know, the sort of demons that Aleister Crowley was summoning up as a magician and having recite books to him were essentially the same kind of being. So depending on the era and what the current vogue is, we see them in different guises. But I can assure you that these black-eyed kids go back a long, long time. They are all over the world. I've been told, you know, it's just a North American phenomenon, but it's not. It's all over the world.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah. These kids
it made my flesh crawl as well again. Because before you came on, I was saying that, you know, I collect stories at one of these paranormal websites, and have done for years. And the first time I got a black-eyed kid story was about 5 years ago. I'd never heard of them, and until that point, I was fairly blasé. You know, here's another story about X. You know, and then I got this first story in, and I was like, my goodness me, I don't think I dare go to bed tonight. You know.
Yeah, I'll swap that feeling. Yeah. So I sort of tried to look at this thing. I wasn't too sure on the terminology of what to call these things, and then it sort of popped up on, I think, was it YouTube or something somewhere, and I was just like, oh my God, that fits something similar, you know.
Yeah.
You know, even then it took me a long time because, you know, it was from the 86, you know, right through. And I tried very hard through my life to put that stuff behind me. But when I actually sort of fell onto it, I sort of tried kind of hard to be a bit more, how do you say, open to fringe thoughts, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And when I sort of course, my favorite one, which I kind of giggle at myself, even though it might be real, is the Bigfoot one, you know? And I was thinking, okay. Then I think it was following one of those videos I watched. There was, is it Paulides, David Paulides? And he was talking about missing, people that go missing.
411,
yeah. And then I started thinking to myself, oh my God, you know, what happens if I would just go missing, if that was the case, you know? And this black-eyed kid thing showed up somewhere on YouTube, and everything just sort of made more sense. But this latest, you know, sort of happening, you know, in 2018, just, I don't know, it just scared me to the point where I got to tell somebody, you know, got to talk to about it with somebody that actually has either A, an idea, or B, sort of understanding it a bit more. You know, it's not the sort of thing I want to share with my family either too much, scaring my kids or something.
Yeah, you sent me that email, and I was like, yeah, I gotta get somebody on, and we're gonna talk about this because that was quite a story you sent me in the email. I mean, quite a story you said you told today. So
yeah, very good. And it's funny because in the internet, this whole phenomena is always thought to be a recent urban myth spread by a guy called Bethel, who had an encounter like your car encounter in 1998, and he put it on a bulletin board on the internet, and it kind of went viral. And then in 2012, he was on some TV show telling his story, and after that,
God,
everybody started coming out the woodwork.
I'm happy to get my story out if it helps anybody. Yeah. I'm not writing books and I'm not doing websites, and I'm certainly not interested in.
But your story, your original story, goes back even further. As I was saying, these stories, they have been going on for a long time in all sorts of places: Australia, Europe. It's the, you know, if you are wanting to sort of take an additional step, I may know somebody in North America that might be able to help. So afterwards, if you want to reach out or something, I can try to hook you up. I can't promise anything, but there's a guy I know in Massachusetts that might be able to help. If you know, I wouldn't do anything unless it happens again. Put it that way.
Okay.
You don't want to.
I wouldn't say I'm paranoid these days, but I'm very close to keeping security very high now. So.
Yeah. So Byron, when we're done here later on today, I'll email you Gary's email. And
hey, yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
You guys can correspond.
Yeah.
That's really good news. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
All right, Byron.
Thanks. So thanks for listening as well. And, you know, you've given me a little bit of relief. I feel I'm not crazy with this thing.
Nope, not at all.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Hey, have a good night, guys. And
all right, Byron. Thanks for coming.
All right, guys. Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Well, Gary,
yeah.
What'd you think?
Well, it sounded, I mean, you can hear in his voice. I mean, sounds real McCoy. And it has many consistencies with all the, you know, with some of the other stories. I mean, in my book, at the end of the book, I give a list of similar characteristics of all the encounters that have been brought to my attention. And, you know, he checks on about 90% of them, I would say. So,
yeah, I mean,
we just listened to a bona fide encounter with black-eyed kids.
How about that, huh?
Yeah, interesting.
You know, and, you know, you get into the line of work of podcasting and you never know what you're going to get. And I was reading that story, and I mean, I was reading that story like, wow, like this is something special here. I got to get somebody on, and we were able to work out a show like this. So, hey man, you want to tell everybody where they can find you?
Yeah, sure. So I actually go under the name of G. Michael Vasey as an author. At one time, I was trying to sort of keep my identity semi-separate from my day life, but didn't work. But I've kept the G. Michael Vasey anyway. So G. Michael Vasey, you can buy my books on Amazon. I do a podcast myself called The Magical World of G. Michael Vasey. You can get that on Spreaker, Apple, all the usual platforms. And if you have a story to tell and you'd like to tell somebody, then pop over to myhauntedlife2.com. That's myhauntedlife2, as in, again, not the number 2, but TOO.com. And give us your story and we'll put it up and see what kind of response we get.
All right. And we'll be right back on Conflict Radio right after this. And welcome back. That was G. Michael Vasey, or Gary, as he likes to be called. I guess his print name is G. Michael Vasey. Be sure to check out his podcast. It actually is pretty good. The Magical World of G. Michael Vasey. That's going to do it for us today. We're going to wrap it up. We will be back for our next show as usual. Until then, batten down the hatches and be safe.